like to learn more about both of your practices as individuals as well as your collaboration and partnership on this project. Charlie, I know that you've worked on a number of curatorial projects that encourage artists and audiences to reframe the everyday and to untangle and recreate a personal relationship to domestic and overlooked spaces as well. Has this informed your approach to Keyhole Wires too?
Yeah, massively, actually. So I started off my curatorial career in Birmingham in the West Midlands, and I ran a really beautiful gallery called Trove that was in this kind of huge space that it was a listed building, used to be a museum. And it was always my ambition actually to be able to produce larger scale works, but sadly due to kind of budgets, I was earlier in my career, I didn't quite understand how you would make something like that happen. It was a real learning curve of a gallery space for me and the artists that we exhibited there. But I always had this dream of doing something really large scale and big in a big space. So being able to then realize this at St Pancras International is amazing. Just being able to kind of go, okay, let's do something with this ambition and scale that I've always dreamt of. So as a curator, that's really joyous. As part of thinking about asking audiences or artists or creatives to rethink spaces, specifically, I've been looking at the domestic as part of I'm a co-founder of an organisation called Squareworks Lab that's based primarily in Mumbai, but we do projects all over the world together. And that is specifically focusing on the domestic and how creatives, artists, thinkers, writers, curators can kind of reinterpret that. So thinking about these spaces that we might always take for granted or that we might kind of use every day and not really consider as a creative space, like a station, like your home, is something that I'm so fascinated in, being able to pull out these little stories or being able to kind of focus somebody's attention on a little area that you'd never really noticed before. For example, I've done a project called Cornered Stories, and it's this idea of how a corner can kind of hold so much without it, basically it being an empty negative space the majority of the time. So pulling out little stories like that or little themes has been something that's always really interested me. So this is a really wonderful project to be able to ask audiences to really rethink how they're using that space, to rethink the stories that are told in that space. It very much links in with my own curatorial practice, which is a joy.
So Samina, you are director of the research and producing consultancy Hybrid, which utilises rigorous research methods to create structural solutions that then empower individuals. And Hybrid has been described as the only arts consultancy that uses action research alongside creative arts-based processes of engagement and individual development. Can you tell me a bit more about your process?
So I come from a community development and an academic background. So when I was writing my PhD, I did not want to sit in the ivory tower and tell people how it was done. I was so fortunate that two of my supervisors were absolutely committed to a grassroots approach in research and talked to me at length about action research, about what it was and what it meant and how it functioned. We hear people talk about action research all the time, and it's one of the many things that annoys me, because they're not talking about action research in its genuine sense. They're talking about research that is active, which is quite different. So when I'm trying to deliver action research, what I'm trying to do is to, I guess, remove me from the picture and position people who are part of the context, part of the situation, at the heart of any activity that happens. For me, they're the experts. They understand what needs to happen. They need support researching it, but they have most of the knowledge that they need. They simply need to experiment, explore, be curious, and work out what's working. So the role, in a sense, of and how I apply it as a curator, as a producer, is that it is about facilitating that and taking quite a back seat in a way. Hence, Charlie and I wanting to work with organisations who have networks and contacts who are working in this area, wanting to work with HS1 to better understand, well, what is it they want for this space and what kind of artists would flourish in producing work for this space. Hybrid is all about listening to people and learning from them and taking that learning and looking how it can affect positive social change through culture It's why we deliver a lot of evaluations. It's why we take on some complex pieces of research, because we think that by positioning people most affected, it helps the research to be useful. The last thing we want is to produce reports that go on shelves, that gather dust, that are not of use to people. And so working with Charlie to curate Keyhole Wires, it was bringing a lot of that thinking about process to the decision making and to the artist's engagement. It was also about working with artists who are critical in their thinking, so who are thinkers. Each of the artists picked up on that sense of place and thought about, well, what is it to be in St Pancras International Station? Where are people going? How are they using the space? If people are rushing, how might the sculpture help them? If they are sitting waiting, how might the sculpture prompt thought? In that space, what could we encourage people to reflect on, and what kind of an impact might that have? And that's all that is at the heart of genuine creative action research. It's about encouraging thinking and encouraging people to think about, how can I improve? How can I develop? How can I address some of the modern problems that we have?